The Nile was the beating heart of ancient Egypt. When its waters flooded, the land grew fertile. When they receded, life returned once again. For the Egyptians, this was not only the secret of agriculture, but also the very law of the universe. But think about it. If you witnessed this same cycle every single year, wouldn't you too believe that life must continue after death? This is why in ancient Egypt, death was never the end. Every tomb was seen as a doorway to a new journey. And who guided that journey? Osiris. Osiris was not only the god of the dead, he was also the king who had once taught humans how to farm, who brought them laws, who established justice. With his name, order itself was born. But the real question is this: was a king made immortal by his own power, or by the strength of the women who brought him back to life? Beside Osiris stood Isis, his wife, his sister, the goddess of magic and healing. Without her devotion and wisdom, the story of Osiris would have ended long ago. And there was Nephthys, the mysterious goddess of the shadows, a companion to death itself. And what about Ma'at, the one who held the scales of justice, who weighed every soul in the afterlife? When the Egyptians looked to the night sky, they did not see just the stars. They saw Osiris torn apart, Isis searching for him, Nephthys whispering in the darkness. Every constellation carried a memory. Every star asked the same question again and again. Is death truly the end? Or is it, in the hands of women, the very key to rebirth? Even today, when we gaze at the pyramids, we see more than blocks of stone. In their shadows, we can still hear the echo of this ancient question, because every stone whispers the story of Osiris and Isis. Osiris was once more than a god. He was a king who walked among mortals. Ancient texts tell us that he ruled Egypt in an age of harmony. He taught men to sow seeds, to reap harvests, and to respect the laws of justice. Under his reign, chaos receded and order took its place. Fields grew golden with grain, and the people praised his name. But history, both mortal and divine, is never free from envy. And in the shadows of Osiris's greatness stood his brother, Seth. Seth was the god of storms, desert winds, and untamed fury. To some, he represented raw power. To others, destructive chaos. He looked at Osiris, the beloved king, and burned with jealousy. Why should Osiris hold the throne? Why should harmony rule when chaos also demanded its place in the world? Isn't it true even in our own lives that harmony always invites the envy of chaos? The myth tells us that Seth devised a plan both cunning and cruel. He crafted a chest, beautifully decorated, made to fit only one body, Osiris's. At a feast, with laughter and wine filling the hall, Seth offered the chest as a gift to whomever it might fit perfectly. One by one the guests tried, but none matched. Then Osiris, unsuspecting and amused, stepped forward. As soon as he lay down, the lid slammed shut. Seth and his conspirators sealed it with molten lead and hurled it into the Nile. The waters carried it away, and with it, Egypt's king vanished into the dark current. Imagine the silence that must have followed. A kingdom without its ruler. A land stripped of its order. Did the people not ask themselves, if a god-king can fall, what hope is left for mortals? But Seth's cruelty did not end there. When Isis, grieving and desperate, searched for her husband, Seth grew furious. He found the body of Osiris and tore it into 14 pieces, scattering them across the land of Egypt. Osiris was not simply killed, he was dismembered, erased, broken into fragments so that even memory itself might fail. Why such brutality? Was it only envy? Or was Seth trying to prove that no one, not even a god, could truly escape oblivion? And yet, this act of destruction gave birth to one of the most profound truths of Egyptian myth, that death is not annihilation, but transformation. Because Osiris's story did not end in pieces. It began again with the women who loved him. Isis searched tirelessly, moving from one corner of the land to another. In swamps and deserts, in sacred groves and hidden tombs, she gathered the fragments of Osiris. Piece by piece, she defied chaos. Nephthys, the goddess of the night, stood by her side, whispering guidance in the shadows. With every fragment they recovered, with every ritual word spoken, they resisted Seth's attempt to erase Osiris from existence. And here lies the question that resonates across time. Was Osiris truly the central figure of this myth, or were the women who resurrected him the true guardians of life? In the temples along the Nile, priests retold this tale in solemn chants. They reminded the people that Osiris's fall was not only tragedy, it was the key to understanding the afterlife. Every death mirrored his dismemberment, and every burial echoed Isis's labor of love. To die was to be broken, but to be remembered, to be bound in ritual and prayer, was to be reborn. Isn't that still true for us today, that memory and love hold power even over death? Seth, of course, raged at this defiance, but no matter how much chaos sought to dominate, it could never fully erase what was bound together by devotion. In Osiris's fall, the Egyptians found hope that no matter how dark the night, dawn would follow, that no matter how absolute death seemed, life could be renewed. Thus, the reign of Osiris ended not in silence, but in a question that would define Egyptian civilization for millennia. What is stronger, chaos or the love that defies it? When Osiris was torn apart and scattered, it seemed that death had triumphed once and for all. But here the myth takes its most remarkable turn. Not through the might of armies, nor the vengeance of gods, but through the endurance of women. Isis stepped into the center of the story. To the Egyptians, she was more than Osiris's wife. She was the embodiment of devotion, of magic, of divine motherhood. Where others saw finality, she saw possibility. She refused to let death dictate the end. Isis began her search for Osiris with a determination that defied despair. Across Egypt, through swamps and deserts, she hunted for the pieces of his broken body. Each fragment was a symbol of resistance. With every part she reclaimed, she wove together the hope that love could defeat chaos. But could love alone overcome the power of death? She was not alone. In the shadows walked Nephthys, her sister. Nephthys was the goddess of twilight, of endings, of the spaces between life and death. To many she was mysterious, even frightening, but in this story she revealed a different face. Where Isis carried light and hope, Nephthys carried silence and endurance. Together they formed a balance, one searching in daylight, the other guarding in the night. And doesn't balance always require both light and shadow? As the sisters gathered Osiris's pieces, they performed sacred rites, whispered spells, and invoked the powers of the earth and sky. Bit by bit, they restored him. Not fully, not perfectly, for no one can return from death unchanged, but enough for Osiris to live again, in a new form, Lord of the afterlife. Here something profound is revealed. Osiris became king of the dead not because of his own might, but because of the devotion of women. Isis's love, Nephthys's loyalty, their shared defiance of chaos, these were the true engines of resurrection. Is it not striking that in a patriarchal society, the ultimate power over death itself was placed in the hands of women? But Isis and Nephthys were not the only female powers shaping this story. From the heavens descended Hathor, the goddess of love, joy, and fertility. At first glance, she might seem distant from the realm of death, yet the Egyptians knew that life and death were threads of the same fabric. Hathor's laughter, her songs, her nurturing embrace reminded them that rebirth was not only possible, but necessary, for without joy, what meaning could resurrection have? Imagine the mourners at a funeral procession, their grief heavy, their tears endless. And then a hymn to Hathor, a reminder that beyond sorrow lies renewal, that beyond death lies reunion. Isn't that the very essence of hope? And then, at the heart of judgment, stood Mamat. She was not a goddess of tenderness or grief, but of truth and order. In her hands rested the scales that weighed every soul. On one side, a feather of absolute purity, on the other, the heart of the deceased. If the heart was heavier, burdened with sin and falsehood, the soul was devoured by Amit, the devourer. If lighter, the soul joined Osiris in eternal life. Here death was not a gate freely opened, it was a test. A soul's fate depended not on status or wealth, but on harmony with Mahat's principle: truth, balance, justice. What does it say about a civilization when it claims that even kings must answer to a feather? In this moment, the feminine principle became the final arbiter of destiny. Osiris might rule the underworld, but it was Ma'at who judged who could enter. Without her, resurrection was meaningless. She embodied the law of the cosmos, the very rhythm that even gods obeyed. Think of the audacity of this idea. In a world dominated by pharaohs and monuments to male rulers, the Egyptians believed that ultimate power, the scale that decides eternity, was held by a goddess. And so the story of Osiris, often remembered as the tale of a god's death and rebirth, is equally the story of women's unyielding strength. Isis's love, Nephthys' endurance, Hathor's joy, Ma'at's justice. Together, they ensured that death was not the end. Without them, Osiris would have remained broken, scattered, forgotten. With them, he became eternal. So we must ask, who truly held the power in this myth? The god who fell, or the women who refused to let him be lost? For the Egyptians, the answer was clear. In every funeral rite, in every carved inscription, their names were invoked. Isis was called upon to protect the dead, Nephthys to guard the tomb, Hathor to guide the soul with tenderness, Ma'at to weigh the heart. Through these women, every Egyptian, king or commoner, hoped to share in Osiris's destiny of rebirth. Perhaps that is why their images were carved not only in temples but in household shrines. Every family, every grieving mother, every widow could see themselves reflected in Isis's search, Nephthys' endurance, Hathor's comfort, and Ma'at's unyielding justice. Even today, when we look at these figures, their power still resonates. They remind us that strength is not always about weapons or dominion. Sometimes it is about love that refuses to surrender, loyalty that stands in the shadows, joy that outlasts sorrow, and justice that even gods cannot escape. And so the myth asks us across the centuries, when death comes, what force will guide you? The chaos of Seth or the hands of women who carry eternity itself? When Isis and Nephthys pieced Osiris together, when Hathor brought comfort and Ma'at weighed the hearts of the dead, a truth emerged that would echo through all of Egyptian history. Life and death were not opposites, but partners in an endless cycle. Osiris, once a king on earth, became ruler of the underworld. Yet his reign was not one of tyranny or fear. He did not command with fire or punishment. Instead, he offered a promise that the dead, if found worthy, could live again. He became the symbol of hope, the assurance that death was a passage, not an end. But can hope survive without memory? That is why the Egyptians built monuments of stone, wrote prayers on papyrus, painted images on tomb walls. They feared that without ritual, without remembrance, the soul might fade. Every pyramid, every hieroglyph carved into the silent rock was a cry against forgetting. They were not only memorials to kings, they were bridges between worlds. And what bridges do we build today to keep memory alive? The cult of Osiris spread throughout Egypt, uniting rich and poor. For the first time, eternal life was not reserved only for pharaohs. Farmers, craftsmen, even children could hope to share Osiris's destiny. All that was required was to live in harmony with Ma'at truth, balance, and justice, and to trust in the protective embrace of the goddesses. Think of how radical this was. In a society where hierarchy shaped every breath, eternity itself was made equal. Every human heart, no matter how humble, would be weighed against the same feather. Doesn't that sound like one of the earliest visions of universal justice? Even today, Osiris's myth remains striking because of this balance. He embodies renewal, but his renewal depends entirely on women. Isis gathers his pieces. Nephthys shields him. Hathor restores joy. Ma'at ensures fairness. Without them, he is only a broken body. With them, he is eternity itself. Perhaps this is why the myth endures. It is not merely the story of a god's fall and resurrection, but the story of how harmony is always born from partnership between male and female, light and shadow, life and death. And isn't that what we still search for? Balance in a world forever pulled between chaos and order? As centuries passed, the image of Isis cradling her child Horus became so iconic that it transcended Egypt. In later ages, it would even influence depictions of the Virgin Mary holding the infant Jesus. The echoes of these goddesses traveled far beyond the Nile, shaping art, faith, and imagination across cultures. It is a reminder, myths never truly die. They transform, adapt, whisper their truths into new languages and new symbols. So when we look at Osiris today, what do we really see? A god of the dead, a king who fell to his brother's envy? Or do we see something more? The eternal lesson that memory, devotion, and justice are stronger than chaos. The Egyptians looked to the night sky and saw Osiris in Orion, Isis in Sirius, Ma'at in the balance of the stars themselves. To them, the heavens were not distant. They were a mirror of their myths. Every rising star was a resurrection. Every setting star was a death. The cosmos itself was telling their story. And perhaps, when we gaze at the same stars tonight, they are still asking us the same question. When your time comes, will your heart be light enough to pass Ma'at's scale? Will memory preserve you? And who will gather your fragments and make you whole again? The Egyptians answered with faith in Osiris and the goddesses who stood beside him. Their monuments still stand, their prayers still echo in the desert winds. Maybe that is the true immortality they sought. Not only life after death, but the assurance that their story would never be forgotten.